The blood on Evangeline Mercer's hands wasn't hers, but she knew everyone in Pitch Pine would assume she'd finally killed her husband. She stood in the back room of the Silver Bell telegraph office, her calico dress soaked through with rain and something darker, staring at the leather-bound ledger she'd pulled from beneath the floorboards. The musty smell of old paper mixed with the metallic tang of blood, and her hands trembled as she turned the pages. Numbers. Columns and columns of numbers, written in her husband's precise script. But these weren't the mining company accounts Thomas kept at home. These were something else entirely. Mrs. Mercer? The voice belonged to Josiah Webb, the telegraph operator who'd found her breaking in through the back window 10 minutes ago. He was a slight man of 40-odd years, with wire-rimmed spectacles that magnified his eyes to an unsettling size. Mrs. Mercer, whose blood is that? Evangeline looked up at him, her auburn hair plastered to her face, and for the first time in 3 years of marriage, she told the complete truth. Samuel Dutton's? He's dead in the ravine behind the old Kellerman mine. Fell and cracked his skull open on the rocks. Josiah's face went white. You pushed him? No. She turned another page of the ledger, her finger tracing down a column. But I watched him die, and I didn't try to save him. Does that make me a murderer, Mr. Webb? The question hung in the air between them like smoke. Outside, the November storm battered the mountain town, wind howling through the pine forests that gave Pitch Pine its name. It was 1883, and up here in the Colorado Rockies, winter came early and stayed late, trapping people with their secrets. Why were you with Dutton? Josiah asked quietly. He didn't approach her, didn't try to take the ledger. Something in his stillness told Evangeline he already knew parts of what she'd discovered. Because I followed my husband there this morning. Thomas told me he was going to Denver on mining business. But I saw him riding toward the old Kellerman shaft instead, and Samuel Dutton was meeting him there. She looked directly at Josiah. You know what they were doing, don't you? You're part of it. Josiah removed his spectacles and cleaned them with a handkerchief, a gesture she recognized as a way to avoid her gaze. What do you think you found, Mrs. Mercer? A smuggling operation. Evangeline's voice was steady now, the shock of watching a man die beginning to crystallize into something harder. Chinese laborers being brought through these mountains illegally. Thomas and Dutton and God knows who else have been running them through the old mine tunnels, moving them from town to town. The numbers here, their payments. Bribes to railroad officials, lawmen, telegraph operators. She paused. The Exclusion Act passed last year, didn't it? No more Chinese immigrants allowed. But there's still money to be made bringing them in, hiding them, moving them. The telegraph key began clicking behind Josiah, making them both jump. He moved to it mechanically, transcribing the message onto a pad. Evangeline watched the color drain further from his face as he wrote. What is it? She demanded. Your husband. He's on his way here. Says there's been an accident at the mine and he needs to send urgent telegrams to Denver. Josiah looked at her with something between pity and fear. He doesn't know you're here. Doesn't know you know. Evangeline's mind raced. Thomas would arrive within minutes. She'd left Samuel Dutton's body in the ravine, but the rain would wash away tracks. Thomas would find him eventually, or someone else would. But right now, she held the ledger, the only physical proof of what they'd been doing. How many? She asked Josiah. How many people have they moved through here? I don't know. Hundreds, maybe. Over 18 months. He sat down heavily on a wooden stool. Mrs. Mercer, you need to understand something. Your husband isn't just part of this. He runs it. The whole operation, from the California coast to the Nebraska plains. Samuel Dutton was just muscle. And Thomas? He swallowed hard. Thomas Mercer is a dangerous man. I know. Evangeline's voice was barely a whisper. I've known for a while. The way he looks at me sometimes, like he's calculating whether I'm an asset or a liability. The locked doors in our house. His trips that last weeks. I just didn't know what I was seeing until today. She'd followed Thomas on horseback through the rain, keeping far enough back that he wouldn't notice. She'd watched him meet Dutton at the mine entrance, watched them argue. She couldn't hear the words over the storm, but she saw Thomas shove Dutton, saw them grapple near the ravine's edge. Then Thomas had walked away, and Dutton had stood there alone for a moment before losing his footing on the muddy ground. Evangeline had been climbing down from her hiding spot in the rocks when Dutton fell. She'd reached him as he lay dying, blood pooling around his head, his eyes finding hers in the gray morning light. He tried to speak, managed only 3 words: box mine, evidence. Then he was gone, and she was covered in his blood, and she'd known exactly where to find the ledger he'd been talking about. Not in the mine, but here, in the telegraph office, where records of all their communications would be kept. The sound of hoofbeats approached through the rain. "He's here," Josiah whispered. "Mrs. Mercer, what are you going to do?" Evangeline looked down at her bloody hands. At the ledger that condemned her husband and God knew how many other respectable men in Pitch Pine. She thought about the little house on Miners Row, where Thomas had installed her after their wedding, how she decorated it with lace curtains and tried to make it feel like a home. How she'd never quite managed it because something had always felt wrong. She thought about the Chinese woman she'd seen once, late at night, being hurried through the alley behind their house. How Thomas had told her it was none of her concern, and she'd believed him because she wanted to believe him. She thought about the life she'd left behind in St. Louis, a comfortable life, a boring life, teaching piano to wealthy children, and how Thomas had seemed like an adventure. How she'd been 30 years old and afraid of becoming invisible, and he'd made her feel seen. Now she knew what he'd really seen: a woman alone, a woman who could be controlled, a woman no one would believe if she started asking questions. The door to the telegraph office banged open. Webb. Thomas Mercer's voice boomed through the building, rain-soaked and irritated. "I need you to send." He stopped dead when he saw his wife standing in the doorway of the back room, blood on her dress, the ledger in her hands. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Evangeline watched her husband's face transform from surprise to calculation to something cold and final. This was it, she realized. The moment where everything changed, where she could never go home again because home had never really existed. "Evangeline," Thomas said softly, in the voice he'd used on their wedding night, "what have you done?" Thomas stepped fully into the telegraph office, water streaming from his oilskin coat onto the pine floorboards. He wasn't a large man, but he carried himself with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. At 38, he had the kind of lean, weathered face that people in mining towns trusted, all hard work and honest eyes. Evangeline had fallen for that face once. Now she saw it clearly, a mask worn by a man who moved human cargo through mountain tunnels like they were silver ore. "I asked you a question." Thomas's voice remained soft, but Evangeline heard the steel beneath it. She'd heard that tone before, usually right before he locked himself in his study for hours. "I followed you," she said, surprised by how steady her own voice sounded. "To the Kellerman mine. I saw you with Samuel Dutton." Thomas's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Behind him, Josiah Webb had gone very still, his hand hovering near the telegraph key as if he might need to send a desperate message. The storm continued its assault on the building, wind screaming through the eaves. "And where is Samuel now?" Thomas asked. "Dead in the ravine." "He fell." Thomas repeated the word like he was tasting it, testing its weight. His eyes never left hers. "Did you push him, Evangeline?" "No, but you did." She saw the flicker of surprise cross his face. "I saw you shove him during your argument." You walked away and he was standing too close to the edge. The mud gave way. For several heartbeats, the only sound was the rain hammering the roof. Then Thomas laughed a short, bitter sound. So you watched him die. My genteel piano teacher from St. Louis, who fainted at the sight of a butchered hog at the market. You watched a man bleed out and did nothing. He was already dying. And he used his last words to tell me where to find this. Evangeline held up the ledger. Her hands had stopped shaking. Something cold and clear had settled into her bones, like the mountain air after a storm. He wanted someone to know. To stop you. Thomas removed his hat and set it on Josiah's desk with deliberate care. Webb, go check the lines. The storm may have damaged them. Thomas, I don't think. Now. Josiah looked at Evangeline with something like apology in his magnified eyes, then grabbed his coat and fled into the rain. The door slammed behind him, leaving husband and wife alone. Thomas moved to the wood stove in the corner, warming his hands. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weariness she'd never heard before. You should have stayed home, Evangeline. You should have kept playing your piano and arranging flowers and pretending to be happy. Like you pretended to love me? I never pretended that. He turned to face her, and for a moment she saw something genuine in his expression. Regret. Maybe, or the ghost of whatever had existed between them once. I married you because I was tired of being alone in this God-forsaken town. Because you were beautiful and cultured and different from the worn-out women at the saloons. Because I thought you'd be content with a comfortable life and wouldn't ask questions. You married me because you needed a wife who looked respectable. A cover for your business. That too. He took a step toward her. But it doesn't change the fact that I care for you, Evangeline. In my way. She almost laughed. Your way involves smuggling desperate people through mine shafts and bribing half the territory. Your way involves letting Samuel Dutton die because he was becoming a liability. She held the ledger tighter. How many people have died in those tunnels, Thomas? How many didn't make it through? His face hardened again. You don't understand the complexity of the situation. Those people pay everything they have for passage. They want to come here. The Exclusion Act is unjust. It keeps willing workers from. Don't. The word came out sharp as broken glass. Don't pretend this is about justice. It's about money. How much do you charge them? Everything they have, you said. And then what? You move them to the next town, the next territory, always taking more. They can't go to the law because they're not supposed to be here. They're trapped. They're alive, Thomas said coldly. Which is more than they'd be if they stayed in China right now. There's famine, war, poverty you can't imagine. I provide a service. You're a criminal. We're all criminals, Evangeline. Every prospector who jumped a claim, every rancher who pushed natives off their land, every railroad baron who bent the rules to lay track. This entire territory was built on people doing whatever it took to survive and prosper. I'm no different. Except I saw the numbers in this ledger. You're not just surviving, Thomas. You're getting rich off their desperation. He studied her for a long moment, rain shadow and lamplight making his face hard to read. What exactly do you plan to do with that ledger? This was the question everything hinged on, and they both knew it. Evangeline had been asking herself the same thing since she'd pulled a book from the floorboards. She could go to the territorial marshal, but half the names in the ledger belonged to lawmen on Thomas's payroll. She could take it to the newspaper, but the editor, Cyrus Hawley, had a notation beside his name that suggested he was bought too. The truth was, she had nowhere to go. No family in Colorado, no close friends in Pitch Pine. She'd been Thomas Mercer's wife for 3 years, but she'd never really belonged to this town. She'd been an ornament, a pretty Eastern woman who made her husband look civilized. I want you to stop, she said finally. Dismantle the operation. Send the people you have hidden somewhere safe. Pay them back what they're owed if you can. And I want a divorce." Thomas's laugh was genuine this time, startled and almost admiring. "A divorce. Do you know what that would do to you in a town like this? You'd be ruined. No respectable woman. I stopped being respectable the moment I decided not to call for help when Samuel Dutton was dying." She met his gaze without flinching. "I'm complicit now too, Thomas. I understand that. But I won't be complicit in anything more." He moved closer and she forced herself not to step back. She could smell the rain on him, the pine sap, the faint scent of tobacco. All the familiar smells of the man she'd shared a bed with, thinking she knew him. "You're not thinking clearly," he said, his voice dropping to that persuasive register that had once made her believe anything he said. "You've had a shock. Seeing Dutton die, discovering things you weren't meant to know. Come home. We'll burn the ledger together. I'll wind down the operation gradually. No. Evangeline, I'm not going home with you, Thomas. Not tonight, not ever. Whatever we had is dead." His hand shot out and gripped her wrist, not quite painful, but firm enough to make his point. "You think you have choices here? You think you can just walk away? That ledger implicates you too now. Your fingerprints are all over it, along with Dutton's blood. If this goes to the marshal, you'll hang right beside me." She'd thought of that already. The moment her hands touched the leather cover, she'd become part of the crime. But she'd also realized something else. Standing in that blood-soaked ravine watching a man take his last breath, she'd rather die trying to do one right thing than live the rest of her life as Thomas Mercer's unknowing accomplice. "Then we'll hang together," she said quietly. "But I won't live a lie anymore." The door burst open. But it wasn't Josiah Webb returning. It was a Chinese woman, younger than Evangeline, wearing men's work clothes and soaked through with rain. She had a revolver in her hand, and it was pointed directly at Thomas Mercer's head. "Let her go," the woman said in accented but clear English, "or I shoot." Thomas released Evangeline's wrist immediately, raising both hands in a gesture of surrender. But his expression wasn't fearful, it was calculating, already working through options and angles. Evangeline stepped away from him, clutching the ledger to her chest, her eyes fixed on the woman with the gun. She was perhaps 25, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a thin scar running along her jawline. Her black hair was cut short like a boy's, practical rather than decorative. The revolver in her hand didn't waver. "Mei Lin," Thomas said, and his voice carried a note of warning. "This isn't what you think." "I think you killed Samuel Dutton," the woman replied. "I think you leave him in ravine like garbage. I think you take money from my people and make promises you don't keep." Evangeline's mind raced. This woman knew Dutton, knew Thomas, which meant she was part of the smuggling operation, but on which side? The ledger felt suddenly heavier in her hands. "Dutton's death was an accident," Thomas said carefully. "A terrible accident. I was coming here to arrange for help to liar." Mei Lin's voice was flat. "You argue with him. He tell you he wants to stop, that he has conscience. You push him and walk away. I was there. I see everything." The confession hung in the air like gun smoke. Thomas's face went very still, the mask slipping completely for the first time. Evangeline realized they'd both been witnesses to the same moment, hidden in different parts of the rocks around the mine. But Mei Lin had seen more, had seen Thomas push Dutton deliberately, not in the heat of a struggle. "You murdered him," Evangeline whispered. "It was self-defense," Thomas said, but the words sounded hollow even to him. He was going to expose the entire operation, destroy everything. "He pulled a knife." "He had no knife," Mei Lin interrupted. "You lie again." Evangeline felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. her understanding of the morning's events rearranging into something darker. She'd told herself it was an accident, that Thomas had shoved Dutton in anger but hadn't meant to kill him. But if Mei Lin was right, if Thomas had deliberately pushed him toward the edge, why didn't you help him? Evangeline asked Mei Lin. If you saw everything, why didn't you try to stop it? Mei Lin's expression flickered with something that might have been shame or rage or both. Because Samuel Dutton was not good man either. He hurt people. He'd take money and then demand more. She stopped, swallowing hard. He hurt my sister. Before she died in tunnel last winter. The room fell silent except for the storm. Evangeline felt like she was standing at the center of a web, each revelation connecting to another, pulling tighter. Your sister died in the mine tunnels? Many people die in tunnels, Mei Lin said bitterly. Collapse. Bad air, cold. Your husband, he promised safe passage. But tunnels are old, dangerous. My sister, her name was Mei Hua. She was 16. The tunnel collapsed and Samuel Dutton, he leave her there. He save himself and leave her to die in dark. Evangeline looked at Thomas, waiting for him to deny it, but he said nothing. His silence was its own confession. So you followed them today, Evangeline said slowly, understanding dawning. You wanted revenge. I want justice. Mei Lin's gun hand remained steady. But then I see his wife there too, watching. I wait to see what she will do. When you take Ledger, when you not go home with him, I think maybe you're different. Maybe you will help stop this. I will, Evangeline said before she could second-guess herself. I want to stop it. Thomas laughed, a harsh sound. You have no idea what you're saying. There are powerful men involved in this. Men in Denver, in Washington. Men who will do anything to protect this operation. Then we expose them all, Evangeline said. With what proof? Thomas gestured at the ledger. That book is just numbers and initials. You can't prove what any of it means. And who would believe you? A hysterical wife who's had a nervous episode and a Chinese woman who's not even supposed to be in this country? He looked at Mei Lin. They'll deport you. Or worse. He's right, Mei Lin said quietly. Ledger is not enough. Evangeline's mind raced. You said box earlier. Dutton told me there was evidence in a box at the mine. What did he mean? Mei Lin's eyes widened slightly. The strong box. In the main tunnel office. Samuel, he keep records there. Real names, real places. He not trust your husband, so he make his own insurance. Thomas's face had gone pale. You don't know what you're talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about. Mei Lin cut him off. Samuel show me. He say if anything happened to him, I should find box and take to authorities. He feel guilty about Mei Hua, about others. He want to make things right before. Her voice cracked slightly. Before you kill him. Evangeline's heart pounded. Then we need to get that box. Tonight, before anyone else knows about it. The mine is 4 miles from here, Thomas said. In this storm, the roads will be mud. The tunnels will be flooding. He looked at Mei Lin. You know how dangerous it is. I know tunnels better than you, Mei Lin said coldly. I walked them many times, helping my people through. I know every shaft, every passage. She turned to Evangeline. You want to stop this? We go now. Get box. Take to someone who cannot be bought. Who? Evangeline asked. Everyone in this territory seems to be on his payroll. Not everyone. Mei Lin lowered the gun slightly, though she kept it trained on Thomas. There is Federal Marshal Henry Carver. He come through 3 months ago, asking questions about smuggling. Thomas, he cannot reach him, cannot buy him. Carver is honest man. He is in Leadville now, 2 days' ride north. Thomas lunged for Mei Lin, but she was faster. The gun came up and fired, the shot deafening in the small room. The bullet splintered the wood frame beside Thomas's head, freezing him in place. "Next one goes through your heart," Mei Lin said calmly. "Now sit." In chair, Thomas sat, his face flushed with fury and fear. Evangeline realized she was breathing hard, adrenaline coursing through her. She'd never heard a gunshot that close before, never seen violence erupt so suddenly. Mei Lin kept the gun on Thomas while she spoke to Evangeline. "We tie him. Then we go to mine. You come with me?" It was a question, not a command. Evangeline could refuse, could walk away from all of this, take her chances with ignorance and denial. But she thought about Mei Hua, 16 years old, dying in the dark of a collapsed tunnel while men counted their profits. She thought about all the desperate people who'd paid everything they had for safe passage, only to find themselves trapped in a system of exploitation. She thought about who she'd been 3 hours ago, a woman playing piano in an empty house, pretending her life had meaning, and who she was now. "I'll come," Evangeline said. Mei Lin nodded. "There is rope in back room. We hurry. Storm is getting worse, and we have long night ahead." As Evangeline went to find rope, Thomas called after her. "You're making a mistake, Evangeline. You don't understand what you're getting into. These tunnels, they're not like anything you've seen. People die down there." She paused in the doorway, looking back at him. "People are already dying, Thomas. The difference is, I won't be the one standing by and letting it happen anymore." Then she disappeared into the back room, leaving her husband tied to a chair and her old life behind, preparing to descend into the dark tunnels where secrets were buried and the truth was waiting to be unearthed. The Kellerman mine entrance yawned before them like a wound in the mountainside, timber supports black with age and rot. Evangeline's lantern cast wild shadows as wind howled through the pines, and she could taste copper in the air, whether from fear or the storm, she couldn't tell. "Stay close," Mei Lin said, lighting her own lantern. "Tunnel splits many ways. Easy to get lost." They'd ridden Thomas's horses through the storm, leaving him bound and gagged in the telegraph office with a note pinned to his chest for Josiah Webb. Gone to finish what Samuel Dutton started. Evangeline had expected to feel frightened on the ride through the darkness, but instead she'd felt strangely alive, every sense heightened. Now, standing at the mouth of the tunnel, the fear caught up with her. "My sister died 50 yards in," Mei Lin said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "Cave-in during snowmelt last February. Water weakened the supports." She touched the timber frame. "These mines, they are all dying. But men like your husband, they use them anyway because they are secret. Because no one comes here anymore." "I'm sorry," Evangeline said. "About Mei Hua." Mei Lin nodded once, then stepped into the darkness. Evangeline followed, the temperature dropping immediately as they left the storm behind. The tunnel smelled of wet stone and old timber, and somewhere in the distance, water dripped with rhythmic persistence. They walked in silence, their lanterns creating small pools of light in the vast darkness. The main shaft was wider than Evangeline had expected, carved when the silver veins had still been rich. Side tunnels branched off like dark arteries, some collapsed, others disappearing into shadows that their lights couldn't penetrate. "Here," Mei Lin stopped at a wooden door reinforced with iron bands. "Office." The door was locked, but Mei Lin produced a key from her pocket. "Samuel give me," she explained. "After Mei Hua die. He say if I ever need help, I should come here." Inside the office was surprisingly intact a desk, filing cabinets, and against the far wall, a iron strongbox. Mei Lin knelt beside it, her fingers working the combination lock with practiced ease. The lid opened with a groan. Documents, dozens of them, carefully organized in folders. Evangeline set down her lantern and began reading by its light. Contracts with railroad officials. Ledgers more detailed than the one she'd found at the telegraph office, with full names and amounts. Letters discussing cargo and merchandise that made her stomach turn. Photographs of men she recognized: the mayor of Pitch Pine, a territorial judge, businessmen from Denver. And at the bottom, a separate folder marked with Mei Hua's name. Mei Lin opened it with shaking hands. Inside were more documents, but these were different. Medical records showing injuries consistent with assault. A letter in Samuel Dutton's handwriting, confessing what he'd done to her and expressing remorse. And a statement, signed by Mei Hua herself just days before she died, detailing not just her assault but everything she'd witnessed in the smuggling operation. She was going to testify, Evangeline breathed. That's why Dutton didn't repair the tunnel supports. He let it collapse, knowing she'd be, yes. Mei Lin's voice was hollow. Samuel murder her. Then guilt eat at him. He'd keep these documents as confession, as proof. But he too coward to do anything while alive. The tunnel groaned around them, a deep sound that Evangeline felt in her bones. Dust rained from the ceiling. We need to go, Mei Lin said, gathering the documents quickly. Storm is flooding tunnels. Not safe to stay. They'd made it halfway back to the entrance when they heard voices echoing through the shaft. Multiple voices and the glow of approaching lanterns. Thomas, Evangeline whispered. He got free. Or Josiah freed him. Mei Lin extinguished her lantern immediately, pulling Evangeline into a side tunnel. They pressed against the wall, barely breathing as the voices grew closer. Can't have gone far, Thomas's voice echoed. The storm's too bad. They're in here somewhere. Maybe we should just collapse the tunnel, another voice suggested. Josiah Webb, solve all our problems at once. No. A third voice, deep and authoritative. I want that strongbox intact, and I want to know what they've seen. We can't afford loose ends, not with the federal marshal already sniffing around. Evangeline didn't recognize the third voice, but Mei Lin stiffened beside her. Mayor Blackwood, she whispered. He is worst of all of them. The lights grew brighter. They were trapped 50 yards from the entrance with 3 armed men between them and freedom. The side tunnel they'd hidden in ended after 20 feet, collapsed rock blocking any escape. Evangeline looked at the documents in Mei Lin's arms, then at the support timbers around them. An idea formed, terrible and necessary. Can you get out through that collapse? She whispered to Mei Lin, pointing at the rubble. Is there a way through? Mei Lin studied the rocks, then nodded slowly. Yes, small passage. I use it before to help people escape when patrols come. But take the documents. Get to Leadville. Find Marshal Carver. Evangeline pressed the ledger from the telegraph office into Mei Lin's hands as well. Tell him everything. What will you do? Evangeline looked at the old timber supports, at the cracks already spreading through the stone ceiling. The tunnel was barely stable. With the right pressure, in the right place. I'm going to buy you time, she said. And make sure they can't follow. No, Mei Lin grabbed her arm. You will die. Tunnel will collapse. Maybe. Or maybe I'll make it out. But you need to go now. Evangeline met her eyes. Your sister's testimony is in those documents. Her truth. Don't let it die in the dark with her. For a moment, Mei Lin looked like she might argue. Then she nodded once, fierce and final. You are brave, Evangeline Mercer. Your husband, he is fool for not seeing it. Then she was gone, squeezing through the gap in the rubble with the documents clutched tight, disappearing into passages too small for men to follow. Evangeline picked up the largest rock she could carry and stepped back into the main tunnel. Thomas saw her first, his face transforming from relief to fury to fear as he understood what she was holding. "Evangeline, don't." She threw the rock at the weakest support timber with all her strength. It connected with a crack that echoed like thunder. The timber splintered. The ceiling groaned. "Run," she told the men, her voice surprisingly calm. Then she ran herself, back toward the entrance as the tunnel began its death throes around her. The sound was overwhelming, rock grinding against rock, timber snapping like bones, the earth itself roaring in pain. Evangeline ran through the darkness, her extinguished lantern useless now, navigating by memory and desperate hope. Behind her, she heard screaming, whether from men or the mountain she couldn't tell. Dust filled her lungs. Rocks rained from above. Something struck her shoulder hard enough to spin her around, but she kept running, kept moving toward where the entrance had to be, where the storm and the night and the rest of her life were waiting. She burst from the tunnel mouth just as the main shaft collapsed completely, the sound like the end of the world. She rolled down the muddy slope, unable to stop herself, until she came to rest in the ravine where Samuel Dutton had died that morning. For a long moment, she lay there in the rain, breathing, bleeding, alive. Then she began to laugh wild, exhausted laughter that turned to sobs somewhere along the way. The tunnel was sealed. Thomas and his associates were trapped inside, if they'd survived at all. And Mei Lin was gone, carrying the truth toward a marshal who couldn't be bought. Evangeline pulled herself up, every muscle screaming. She had no home to return to, no husband, no money. She was covered in blood and mud, possibly a murderer, certainly a woman who'd never be welcomed in polite society again. She'd never felt freer in her life. By the time Mei Lin reached Marshall Carver 3 days later, Evangeline had already left Colorado. She took nothing from the house on Miners Row, except her mother's piano music and enough money from Thomas's safe to buy a train ticket east. She would start again, under a different name, in a different territory. But sometimes, late at night in her new life, she would think about the Chinese woman with the scar on her jaw, about 16-year-old Mei Hua dying in the dark, about all the people who'd paid for passage and found only exploitation. She would think about the moment she chose truth over comfort, danger over complicity. Marshall Carver's investigation, aided by Mei Lin's testimony and the documents from the strongbox, brought down the entire smuggling network. 14 men were arrested. The Chinese Exclusion Act remained law, but at least one corrupt system had been exposed and dismantled. As for Thomas Mercer, his body was never recovered from the collapsed Kellerman mine. Neither were Mayor Blackwood's or Josiah Webb's. Some said they'd escaped through other tunnels, that they were hiding somewhere, planning revenge. Others said the mountain had taken its due, that justice had been served in the oldest way. Evangeline never knew which story was true, and she found she didn't need to. She'd made her choice the moment she refused to go home with her husband. Everything after was just the price of freedom, paid in full and without regret.